Okay, so the title of this chapter is The Golden Lion. Gold seems to be a recurring theme in Mahayana Buddhism. Of course, if you go to any museum, including ours here in Cleveland, you'll see lots of gold iconography. So it's a favorite material. We're not the only religion that's the case for, but we're among them, which is interesting. But I'll let that go with that. But the verse from Yui Song's Song of Dharma Nature that we're looking at here states in this line, adorns the Dharma realm, a true jeweled palace. And here, the word Dharma is in a capital D, signifying the teaching, the ultimate, but could equally, I think, in this context, also be a lowercase d, in which case it just signifies all things. So the realm of all things, of course, ultimately is the Dharma realm. This is one of the teachings that we're kind of focusing on with this text. So in this adornment, which we're going to be talking about tonight, it's a jeweled palace before our adornment activity. And we'll be looking a little bit further into how that works. So we might think that, well, since it's already a jeweled palace, it's perfect and complete just as it is, and why do I need to adorn it? That would be a natural thought to come up. It's doing fine just as it is. But that palace includes us. So we are part of that adorning, because adornment turns it into a noun. Of course, we don't like nouns in this practice. Everything's active. So everything is adorning everything else. That sounds pretty Huayan, the philosophy whose most essential metaphor, I guess we could call it, is Indra's net. Everything lights everything else. Everything is a reflection of everything else. Everything adorns everything else. So those are just some of my thoughts that come up before I even start reading Ben's commentary on what arises here. And the other thing I wanted to insert, and then I'll come back to Ben, and we'll stick maybe a little more closely to Ben than sometimes is my propensity here. But there were a couple of things this week that I thought tied in nicely to bring it to 2026. The first one was yesterday's launch of the Artemis II. That's one of the advantages of being retired, is I could spend some time with that. Pull up the NASA app and watch a couple of brief kind of background videos, and kind of, I must say, I'll call it emotionally invested in the whole thing. That's pretty easy, especially in our time, because I saw this as kind of our better natures maybe being able to come together and do something like this. So, one of the things that I learned in the background stuff that I was accessing was the way that the four crew members came to name their spacecraft, the Orion spacecraft that they're actually traveling in. And they came to name it Integrity. And the explanation behind it points to a couple of things. First off, the name Integrity embodies the foundation of trust, respect, candor, and humility across the crew and the many engineers, technicians, scientists, planners, and dreamers required for mission success. And it seems fitting on this night when we just did the full moon ceremony. These are all traits that we could kind of trace back to vows that we make to kind of conduct our lives in this fashion. So here we have a rather large sangha that's coming together to accomplish something. Another thing that's just struck me about this, because they're going to the moon, of course, to orbit it. They're not going to land, they're just orbiting it. But to see the moon in terms of this Sandokai phenomenon, the merging of difference and unity. Because the moon and the celestial bodies, more broadly speaking, have historically represented kind of the ultimate. They have inspired us in a spiritual way. That's just the pull that they've had on us. And you could kind of trace our fascination with getting to the moon back to those early spiritual folks, the shamans of early times, and our relationship with the heavenly bodies. So there's something spiritual, even for the most hard-boiled scientists. What draws them to the field of astronomy tends to be something that goes a little deeper than just, that investigative impulse. There's something deeper going on. And yet, to do something like this requires us within the conventional realm of analysis and differentiating. It requires you to really be able to function at the highest levels there in order to respond to this spiritual impulse that's pushing us to do this sort of thing. So it just struck me as being kind of a perfect example of this coming together of the ultimate with our conventional way of seeing things. That they're both they belong together. And this I just thought was a beautiful example of it. And one more example, and this comes back to the crew members and why they named their craft Integrity. The name is also a nod to the extensive integrated effort. Remember, integrity, integrated, integration, Huayan. So this is beautiful. Integrity is got Huayan running all through it. So it's a nod to the extensive integrated effort from the more than 300,000 spacecraft components, so all the physical parts, to the thousands of people across the world that must come together to venture to the moon and back, inspire the world, and set course for a long-term presence at the moon. So, yeah. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, then we'll get to Ben, is I highly recommend for everybody, if you have the opportunity to access PBS, there's a 3-part series on Henry David Thoreau, who talk about your spiritual people. We could learn a great deal from him in terms of his practice. And of course, one of the episodes is primarily focused on his 2 years at Walden Pond, which was also kind of pointing to this merging of difference and unity. Because he didn't go off on a hermitage. He built a cabin in the woods, but it was in the woods right on the edge of Concord. He had visitors. On some occasions, large numbers of visitors, because he'd have speakers come and give lectures from his front door, which would obviously draw a fairly good crowd of people. And he would go into town. In fact, it was during his stay at Walden Pond that he ended up spending his famous night in jail over his failure to pay taxes for a period of 4 years. And it led him to write what is his second most important, most read work after Walden, is on civil disobedience. And probably the most impactful of his writings, because it had a huge impact on Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and all this is pointed to in this series. So, I mean, his teachings. And the other point about Thoreau that comes out is that he had encountered texts from Eastern thought. He was familiar with the Bhagavad Gita and some of the Buddhist sutras. So it's not so much that those teachings shaped him as that I think they probably served to just kind of reinforce the path he was already on. Because he's another beautiful example of somebody who's a Buddhist, just not formally, but he's cut from the same cloth. So when he read those texts, they obviously resonated pretty deeply with him. Just as his texts would have resonated deeply if they went off to Asian lands, they would have said, yeah, he is a Buddhist or a Hindu or whatever. So, just some random thoughts that have come up for me over the past few days that I thought were relevant to what we're studying. So let's get back now to the text and Ben's commentary on the verse that I just read. Ben says, our practice is to adorn something unutterably precious and beautiful, to strew flowers in a field of flowers, to pour compassion into an ocean of compassion. So again, as I suggested, this sounds like, well, why would you bother doing that? Right? But we have to really understand what it means to realize that we're in this field of flowers constantly, always. What is it to see that? And also to see that we're in this ocean of compassion. That it is what holds us up, makes our lives here possible. Because we can't exist alone. The core teaching of interdependence that Huayan is all about. So this is our realm. But to see that calls forth our own practice of strewing flowers and pouring compassion. Because that's what's running through us, thanks to the efforts of others. So what are we going to do? Why would we accumulate it? It's all around. We simply, I might say, get with the program of reality. If you understand that, then you naturally will get with the program. You see how unutterably beautiful and magnificent it is. And you can be awestruck, just like Thoreau was every morning when he'd wake up to the songs of the birds out there in the early morning light. It's fabulous, incredible. So to his mind, why would you get up and go out seeking things as good consumers, to use our more contemporary term? What is the point of that? For him, just to be there in his little cabin, one room, and to be able to look out the window, step out the front door, walk around the pond, through the woods, follow his own whim, but always recognizing this forest of flowers, even when he goes into the town rather than into the woods. And Ben talks in this chapter about his own history, what brings him to the practice and what his early practice looked like. That he was trying to fix his broken self in what he saw as an awful world, not a world that was strewn with flowers or an ocean of compassion. Rather, he and the world he found himself in was consumed by rage and despair, as he describes it. But somehow, he says, Dharma teachings made a crack in these fixed views that were created in his haze of afflictive emotion. So when that's the realm we perceive ourselves as inhabiting, these are kinds of views that will come up. So the first experience of Dharma often for people is reading. It might just be one line of text, or it might be an entire book. But it's that crack all of a sudden appears. And it's like there's some light being shed. And it's just enough to incentivize somebody to go a little bit further with it, and a little bit further. The crack continues to open wider. Until finally, one can actually begin to glimpse the truth that's being spoken to here about the field of flowers and the ocean of compassion. We get deeper and deeper images more frequently occurring of that side of reality. And our behavior then begins to take on that character as well. It's only natural. As he describes it, putting it in terms of our practice of Zazen, which of course is the heart of our practice. He says, lengthening his spine and breathing into the belly, he noticed that he was not broken. That place that Zazen takes us to, which isn't really taking us any place. We're coming home. We're returning home to see it as it really is, where we are not broken. And hence we become more drawn to this practice because we begin to see a side of ourselves that maybe we haven't really seen very much of until that point. And we now find ourselves taking on a practice that's all about opening that up for us. As we say, it's about finding our true nature. And in turn, thereby discover the true nature of all things. So it's not just about us. It's ultimately about all things, all beings. And coming back then, not to Wei Song's poem, but to the Avatamsaka Sutra itself, that 1,400-page monster of a text. At various points in that sutra, people bring vast troves of jewels out of the earth with a mere gesture or wish. So this sense of extracting jewels with ease, because they are there. And there's no competition with others. It's not like during the gold rushes of various parts of the United States back in the 19th century, where you would want to find the gold before somebody else did. This is a different scenario where the jewels are there for everybody. And just because somebody else is there extracting them doesn't impede my ability to extract just as many, nor for everybody else. So these are very special jewels, very, very precious jewels that truly are boundless. We talk about boundlessness. This is a great example of that. The boundlessness of the jewels that can never be exhausted. So Ben then talks about a teaching of one of the great thinkers within the Huayan disciples of the Avatamsaka Sutra. Fa Zhang describes adorning the realm And of course, adorning the realm, remember, is this strewing flowers in a field that's already covered with flowers. How do we do that? And Fazang has this to say: it's acting according to truth and virtue, embodying the paramitas and awakening. That's how we adorn the realm. That's how we strew our flowers. So it is our practice, and it is an activity. Always active, always doing. Dogen's practice enlightenment. It's in our practice that we achieve enlightenment, awakening, and it's ongoing. And this is another chapter where Ben includes a quote from my favorite Buddhist, who's not a Buddhist, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote, "Paying attention is a form of reciprocity with the living world, receiving the gifts with open eyes and open heart." Paying attention. It's the heart of Zazen. When I'm teaching Zazen out there, that's what I'm talking about, is telling them they're learning to pay attention. And simply through that activity, which is very much an activity, speaking of practice, it's active, paying attention. It's a form of reciprocity with the living world. And this reciprocity then results in receiving gifts with open eyes and open heart. But we have to be paying attention to see the gifts, to understand the gifts, to appreciate the gifts that we've been receiving, but without recognition because we're not paying attention. Our mind is focused on other things. So the gifts we're regularly receiving, we don't have a clue. Not a clue. So the power of paying attention. Another pointer as to the centrality of Zazen practice and how what seems to be a very passive thing to do, just sitting, facing the wall, actually leads to something so profound. From an active standpoint, the activity of paying attention within our lives, moment by moment by moment. So and as long as I've brought up Robin Wall Kimmerer and the documentary on Thoreau, she does, it's the second episode, they have a lineup of noteworthy people that are offering their commentaries on the importance of Thoreau, and Robin is one of those individuals in the second episode. But now Ben turns to the Avatamsaka Sutra, and the chief character there, Sudana, who travels to learn from the girl Maitrayani in a hall filled with townspeople. He asks her how to do the practice of a bodhisattva. She says, "Look around." Wow. Beautiful. Beautiful. So he looks at the pillars, the people, and the banners. and he sees Buddha. Then she being this girl, Maitrayani, she says she has perfected the practice of facing in all directions. So think of it, if Avalokiteshvara is this figure with the 1,000 arms, so that she can dispense compassion to all the cries that she hears, then this we might visualize 1,000 faces that can face in all directions to have this deep realization. So as Ben puts it, developing open awareness through meditation is a gateway to seeing the Buddha in each thing. Open awareness. That sounds like shikantaza, right? Just openly aware. When we go beyond our focus on our breath or on a mantra or anything, whatever it might be, and we just open awareness. That's actually a common description of shikantaza, of just sitting, facing the myriad directions with open awareness. And when we do that, we can see the Buddha in each thing, in each direction. And towards the end of this chapter, Ben has something of interest to say about Mahayana teachings, which we've spent a lot of time over the years looking at various Mahayana texts and studying them in some depth. And we can therefore appreciate the way Ben describes them. He says, Mahayana teachings on emptiness are hard to grasp, if not impossible. But he tells us why. Because their purpose is to bring you to an awareness where there is nothing to grasp, and thus no grasping. So these teachings on emptiness, and his description where there's nothing to grasp and thus no grasping, is one of the reasons why so many texts in Zen come down to us as poetry, because that's kind of embedded within the nature of poetry. That there's nothing, if you take an analytical approach, so you can feel like, well, that way I can get to the core of it, the kernel, then you're never going to be able to. That's actually an illusion that we bring with us when we approach that piece. And that's especially true for koans, hence their importance in Zen practice, both Rinzai and Soto. Because again, they bring us to this awareness where there's nothing to grasp and thus no grasping. They open the door to that kind of awareness. And every time we try to grasp something there, we come up empty. Not it, not it. And this is true for each thing. Each thing is of immeasurable value, Ben says. So each thing is like this. Just this is it. Dongshan. And because just this, every just this, is it, the indescribable, Each thing is of immeasurable value, cannot be grasped. And the closing of this chapter is a really, really important point. So I wanted to take a few minutes before I finish up here just to look at this, where Ben says, when we see a world that is made of objects to be used, it's their use value that we're interested in. That's how we relate to them. That's how they get our attention. Is it something I can use? Because if it isn't, then we ignore it. It's of no interest. So when we see a world that's made of objects to be used, we stray from practicing the way. That's not, the way is seeing the Buddha in everything, seeing the adornment of flowers everywhere. And it's not about how can I use it. So in recent weeks, I've had occasion to reference some of these teachings to the Western philosopher who was quite important in that discipline in our part of the world. Immanuel Kant had a view on humanity that equated to this. When we see a world that is made of objects to be used, Kant stated that humans cannot be a means to an end, cannot be used. They have ultimate value. It's another way of saying Buddha nature. They are Buddha nature. They are boundless. They have infinite value. So this way of perceiving things, at least within the realm of humanism in Western thought, also has some precedent. But Buddhism is taking this more broadly and applying it to all things. That it's not limited to our particular species. So the earth is not an object to be used. And it seems so perfectly natural that a chapter where he brings in a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer has this core understanding that the earth is not an object to be used. So that the Native American spiritual view, which Robin advocates so eloquently for, is very much cut from this cloth, to see the earth as Buddha nature, as of inherent value. And this reciprocity, that the earth cares for us, and we naturally need to care for it as well. So the notion of having dominion over it, to use that biblical phrase that has caused so much harm, that's completely alien to this more spiritual, sacred way of seeing the world around us. That these are not objects to be used. Even though it's undeniable, of course, that we do use them for various things. But it's the way we see that relationship. They are more than objects. And through that recognition, we feel gratitude then, rather than, well, that's what they're here for. Why would that induce gratitude? That's what it's there for. It's being provided for us. It could the provision may be because we were able to purchase it, or we were able to work for it, but in some way or another we earned it. Rather than to see it, it's just a gift. So what's called the gift economy, which of course is the way I see our community, because we have needs for money, but it's a gift. It's purely a gift. The giving, the receiving. So it's a whole different way of seeing the world around us and the way we interact with it. If we can just see that the earth is not an object to be used. See this sense of reciprocity. If it's supporting me, I need to support it. It's clearly a very gross absence of virtue to not respond in that way. It's horrible. So how did we come to see it as the standard way to respond to the world around us? It's sad. So that's what I wanted to review from this chapter. I'll bow out. If there are any thoughts, questions? Oh, Nick.
Well, I wrote this last week, and it felt relevant. If I could share, so
Yeah.
I titled it Guan Yin, so I used the Chinese title instead of Avalokiteshvara.
Yes.
A little something I wrote, but where many hands come together to rebuild in the wake of destruction, there are the 1,000 hands of the Bodhisattva. Where many eyes bear witness to suffering, there are her 1,000 eyes. Where many minds unite in a dream of a better world, there are 1,000 heads. Thus, we doubters find ourselves as believers through compassionate action rather than intellectual assent.
Mm. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you again. Just that power of paying attention, just to see, just to hear. Because when we think about it, our intellects, they serve as filters. So what we see and hear ends up getting distorted when we run it through our intellect. So we have to be careful there. To have the capacity just to see. So that you're always starting from that, because we rarely do. Normally we start with the filtered product, and that's it. Just paying attention. Look, see, hear, feel.
And I just wanted to ask what that reading, Nick, was from again.
It was a piece that I wrote for my Substack. I write about music and
Oh,
a bunch of different stuff on there. But so, yeah, it was just something, original piece of writing.
do you mind reading it again?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Let me pull it back up.
Mhm.
Where the many hands come, where many hands come together to rebuild in the wake of destruction, there are the thousand hands of the Bodhisattva. Where many eyes bear witness to suffering, there are her thousand eyes. Where many minds unite in a dream of a better world, there are a thousand heads. Thus we doubters find ourselves as believers through compassionate action rather than intellectual assent.
Thank you. Do you mind sharing that with Dean and he could send it?
Yeah, I can send a link to my Substack to the email.
Oh,
Beautiful.
cool. Great. I love that. Beautiful. Thank you.
I agree.
Really
you.
beautiful. I was like, I gotta get that book.
No book yet, but
You're on your way.
thank you.
Joe?
I was just listening to an interview with Michael Pollan. Mark sent me the link actually, and it's just a mention that he made that we all spend all of our growing up years developing filters and biases
Mhm.
so that we can function as adults.
Right.
And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Just yesterday, his book arrived on my doorstep. So that will find its way into some future Dharma talks, I'm sure. All right, well, let's go ahead and chant out then. I vow to myself and to each of you to commit myself daily to the healing of our world and the welfare of all beings, to live on earth more lightly and less violently in the food, products, and energy I consume, to draw strength and guidance from the living earth, the ancestors, the future generations, and my brothers and sisters of all species, to support others in our work for the world, and to ask for help when I need it, to pursue a daily practice that clarifies my mind, strengthens my heart, and supports me in observing these vows. All right. Well, thanks for being with us tonight, and we'll be back here on Saturday for our April Jukai class. So hope to see you then.